Chapter 3 of Banking Under Difficulties by George Ogilvy Preshaw. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Beeswax Candle. Chapter 3. Prior to fixing my tent at Campbell's Creek and at that part now designated Preshaw's Flat, I had, in obedience to the law, taken out 6 licenses, the number of our party. These expired just as we were fixing our tent. I went to the camp once or twice to obtain new ones, or rather to get my own, for each man now was on his own hook, but the rush was so great that I could not afford time to wait. But, reckoning on myself as a resident, I thought there was no necessity for haste, and that I could obtain my license at another time. I sent one of my sons, and he stood for his turn, and after an ordinary amount of pushing and squeezing got up to the temporary desk at the commissioner's tent. Someone had frightened the little fellow into the belief that if he had not a license, the traps, police, would be after him, and in the simplicity of his heart he said to the commissioner, "Have boys to get licenses, sir?" "What do you do, my lad?" "Keep my father's tent." "But don't you rock the cradle now and then?" "Yes," said he. "Then you must have a license. What's your name?" "Here's your license. Give me the cash. 30 shillings. "That's right. Pass on." I thought it sharp practice, but there was no help for it in those days. The boy felt a man's importance, and I believe the little affair gave him a lesson in life. One morning about 8 a.m. the lads came rushing into the tent, calling out, "The traps! The traps!" I looked out, and about 20 mounted men drew up within 100 yards of my tent. At the word of command, they dispersed. They were license hunting. One went one way, another went another. The twinkling of an eye they were soon scattered all over the flat. Some of the diggers had licenses, others had not. The fellows below kept there, and those on the top who had not the necessary document were walked off, and as soon as 30 or 40 delinquents were secured, were taken to the camp, more like dogs than men, for many an honest heart was beating beneath a blue Guernsey, and felt degraded by being driven before an armed force to jail, and, having neither friends nor money, sent to the roads to work out the fine. While I was musing over the matter, a policeman came up and asked me if I had a license. "Yes," said I, "to sell physic in all parts of Her Majesty's dominions." "But," said he, "I'm in a license to dig for gold." I told him that I had paid for 18 licenses during the last 3 months, in all £36, that I had sent my 30 shillings for another, and that my little son went for me and had to save himself at my expense. "But," said I, "you see there's an air of stability about my establishment. If you have no license to sell, go your way, and if on your return I am not able to produce one, then deal with me accordingly." The policeman, who was a cool, sensible fellow, went away and reported to his superior, who sent him back to say, if I had no license I must follow the multitude. I put a couple of pounds in my pocket and was marched behind 2 men with fixed bayonets to the camp. I asked to be taken before the commissioner, but was taken to the watch-house, and my name placed on the police sheet. The watch-house keeper said that I might deposit £5 as bail, and appear at 10 o'clock. I had only £2, but sent to my friend Mr. Lowe, the Scotch minister, to borrow 3, bailed myself out, and returned at 10, at least according to my watch. I met the policeman at the court door. "Bail forfeited. Too late, sir." "Maybe so," said I, but being a Scotchman, believed that there were 2 at making a bargain. I went into court, and when the case in hand was disposed of, asked the PM why my bail was forfeited. He gave me an audience, and said that he would rehear the case. He then asked what the charge was, and if I had a license. He said he did not make the law, but administered it, that I would have to pay the Queen 30 shillings for not having a license, and would have to take out a new one at once. The weather was warm, and lemonade all the rage. In fact, it was difficult to get anything else. There were no licensed public-houses nearer than the Sawpit Gully, Elphinstone, a distance of 7 miles, and there ale and porter with 8 shillings a bottle, and brandy 1 shilling and 6pence per glass. A decent-going Scotchman was determined to give the lemonade trade a trial. He erected a very nice tent within a few yards of my establishment, and no sooner opened his door than he opened a very good trade in soda, acid, and dirty water. I profited a little by his spec, for I had a few ounces of tartaric acid in my medicine chest, which he quickly purchased at 1 shilling per ounce. The first day he opened, one of the few females we had about called at his counter for a shilling's worth of eye water. Johnny Raw said that he did not keep any, but that a doctor lived next tent. "Oh, I don't mean eye water, you fool. It's a little hard stuff I mean." A new thought flashed across his mind. The new establishment was soon visited by a wholesale sly dealer in grog, and a supply obtained. I mentioned to him the risk he was running, not only to have his tent burnt down, but himself fined £50. The lady customer was soon aware that Simple Sandy had got eye water, and called every morning for some time with a pretty bunch of wildflowers and got her shilling's worth, and returned in the evening with her old chap, as she called him, for dose the second. She brought other folk with her, and day after day my friend rejoiced at the vast profits he was making, doing such a stroke. One afternoon, a little before sunset, he came in breathless haste to my tent and said one of the women had given him the hint that the traps were on the lookout for sly grog sellers, and that he had better keep a sharp lookout and keep no more beside him than was permitted for private use, and asked if I would take charge of a case or two of Hollands for him. I told him that I would have nothing to do in the matter, and as he would not take my advice, I had no shelter or pity for him. It was just dark when 2 men and 2 women ran into his tent and told him that 40 troopers were on their way to Moonlight, and that someone had informed on him. "Quick, make haste, hide your stuff somewhere." One of the women suggested to drop the cases into a hole close by. "Capital," said he. The cases were carried to the hole, and as soon carried off by an accomplice. Some bags of sugar and pairs of boots would not do to be hidden in the water-hole, so they were carried off by someone to a place of safety, who afterwards returned to tell the sly grog-seller that he had seen the troopers but had put them off the scent. The storekeeper kept a watch over the water-hole, and it was only in the morning that he found out that he was the dupe of people who were too cunning for him, and who had made themselves scarce before he was aware of their duplicity. The first gold discovery at Mount Alexander was made by John Worley and Christopher Thomas Peters at Specimen Gully on the 20th of July, 1851, at which time the first named was a bullock driver, and the latter a hut-keeper in the service of William Barker, Esquire. The late Mr. Pierce of Castlemaine was at that time superintendent of the station, from whom I obtained the following information. He was present when the first dish of stuff was washed, which, to use his own words, was black soil, as black as your hat. It was obtained from a little gully and panned off in a small soup tin, the result being 6 pieces of gold, about the size of wheat corns. They did not appear to know what it was, and asked Mr. Pierce if he did. He said he did not, but told the lucky finders that if they gave him some of it, he would send it to Melbourne and find out. They offered him the lot, but he took 2 or 3 pieces, which he sent to Mrs. Pierce, at that time in Melbourne, who took it to a friend of hers, Mr. Stubbs, the well-known auctioneer of that town, with a message from her husband, stating that there was plenty of that kind of stuff at Barker's Creek, and if it was of any value, to send his 2 sons up. The next attempt was on the hillside, about 100 yards from the first gold, to which they drove a tunnel, and discovered a quartz leader thickly impregnated with gold. This necessitated the breaking up of the quartz, which they considered too much trouble and soon left it. In about a week the young Stubbs arrived, and with them others. Hundreds followed, and in less than a week miles of tents were pitched. Soon after gold was discovered at Golden Point in great quantities. Worley and his mates removed there, and did remarkably well. As Mr. Pierce was riding past the tent one day, Mrs. Worley hailed him. He went over, and she brought out a pickle bottle full of nuggets, which she informed him was the result of the morning's work. She asked him to take one, which he declined to do. She insisted, however, and gave him one which weighed over an ounce. Worley and party cleared £1,000 per man out of this claim. Mr. Pierce then started gold buying. He gave 27 shillings per ounce for the first parcel, which he sold to Dr. Barker for 30 shillings. The price rose to £2. The gold was weighed off in ordinary scales used by grocers. When he had a good parcel, he would take it over to the commissioner's camp and sell it to them, merely saying, I gave so much for this lot, I want £10 of my bargain. This was given without demur. The price charged for sheep for the first 6 months was 7 shillings per head, which afterwards rose to 9 shillings. Beef was £1 per cubic weight. The first commissioner on the field was Captain Dana, with a body of black police, 7 or 8 in number. These men were sent licence hunting. Although unable to read or write, they would go to a hole and say, "Me want 'em to see licence belong a you." If the miners had licences, they showed them. If not, a piece of paper was handed to them with which they were satisfied. After a time, the miners were better looked after. The cash obtained from the sale of cattle and sheep was placed in a coffee pot and planted under a plank floor or sometimes under a high window ledge. Mr. Pearce was at the first Bendigo rush. Footnote. Its original name, Bendigo, was given to the place by the first diggers in honour of a shepherd whose hut had stood there for some time, and whose admiration for the once renowned pugilist Bendigo obtained for him the familiar sobriquet of Bendigo Jack. End of footnote. Dr. Edward Barker, a brother to Dr. William Barker and a friend of his, drove up to Bendigo from Melbourne in an old-fashioned carriage and pitched their tent, where they remained about 6 weeks, clearing £1,000 per man. They then left for Melbourne. The doctor is still in practice. His partner sailed for England, taking his gold with him, but unfortunately never reached there, as the vessel on which he sailed was lost. The doctor took a case of surgical instruments to Bendigo with him, which was stolen out of his tent and never recovered. Mr. Fletcher, the first police magistrate in the district, took up his quarters at Barker's Station. The first police camp was pitched at Golden Point. About this time Governor Latrobe visited the diggings and was entertained by Dr. Barker at the station. The following is a report from a select committee of the Legislative Council on the claims for the discovery of gold in Victoria, 10th March 1854. But the prolific deposits of Mount Alexander render it interesting to record that the honour of first finding gold there is claimed by Christopher Thomas Peters, then a hut-keeper at Barker's Creek, in the employ of William Barker, Esquire, on the 20th July 1851 at Specimen Gully. John Worley, George Robinson, and Robert Keane, all in the same employment, were immediately associated with him in working the deposits, which they continued to do until the following month. On the 1st September, having become alarmed at the unauthorised appropriation of their produce, Worley, on behalf of the party, to prevent their getting into trouble, published in one of the Melbourne journals an announcement of the precise situation of their workings. With this obscure notice, rendered still more so by the locality being described by the journalist as at Western Port, were ushered into the world the inexhaustible treasures of Mount Alexander. End of chapter 3.